Hey, welcome to the channel and another story of exactly 1,000 words inspired by a piece of artwork and written on the spot, of course. I know I'm late, folks. If you're catching this on, I don't know when I'm going to post this, maybe on Wednesday, then yes, you know I am almost a week late. I'm sorry I became very busy and I was on vacation. So alas, here we are, a little bit late. But I have a little bit of an announcement to make if you are watching this in a timely fashion, because this is the 99th episode. That means we are one away from episode 100. And I had this idea where, why don't I make it a live stream? Why don't I do the entire thing live with an audience, with a group of people who maybe want to contribute as well, who maybe want to help choose the artwork I use as inspiration, as well as write their own stories. If you're a writer out there, I would love it if you would join me. And if there is actually some participation here, I would love to take your stories, read them, make a video of all of them, read them back to back, talk about my thoughts. I think it would be a cool time. And then obviously I'd have mine in there too. But the idea is to do this just like I do these videos. So on the spot in one sitting. So my plan is to share my screen, share the timer, share the artwork. And again, we'll all pick the artwork together and just write the entire thing, call it good at the end of that session. And I'm sure it'll be a little bit longer than normal because, you know, we'll be talking together. I'm not going to be sitting here in isolation. So we'll be choosing the art and who knows, talking about storytelling or good books or good movies or whatever you'd like to talk about. So if you're a writer, please join me. If you're not a writer, that doesn't mean you can't show up. If you want to hang out with me and the rest of the people who watch the channel, talk about, like I said, storytelling, books, movies, whatever it is, we would love to have you. All right, well, let's talk about this one, episode 99, the one I am, let's see, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, possibly 5 days late on. I apologize for that. I know this series has a very small viewership. There aren't a lot of people waiting for this video, and that's okay. That's okay. So this one, you know, from the thumbnail, it is a man in a subway, an empty subway with the exception of him. And I don't know why I thought this. I went back to an artist I enjoy named Cliff Martinez. He does a lot of film soundtracks, and something about the germiness of a subway, I guess, inspired me to pick the Contagion soundtrack by, of course, Cliff Martinez. So that is what I'd listen to. So why don't you turn on that digital bacteria, get your hands a little dirty, and let's check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Subway Material Testing, and it's by Xichen Wang, who's a concept artist from Beijing, China. This one's funny because really what got me to do this wasn't so much the image. I mean, I enjoy the image, right, and what it's doing here. It's stark. There's a man sitting in the middle of the newspaper. What really kind of got my brain working is the title in conjunction with the image. So the image is titled Subway Material Testing, which means that this 3D artist is just testing materials in this 3D render, right? He's doing an experiment. But I decided to use that as inspiration for the story. It immediately got the cogs turning in my brain, and so that's why I chose this one. But let us take a closer look here. Well, like I said, we have a 3D render of a subway. It's at night or in a tunnel somewhere, obviously. It's lit by these LEDs above, and there's a man wearing a suit, an older man who is just casually reading a newspaper completely alone. So will the story be about this man, or will it be about someone else? I don't know. Let us find out what story I concoct. Xichen, thank you so much for the inspiring artwork. So let us see what I came up with. Jones leaned against the subway doors, mopping the sweat from his upper lip with the last dry corner of a paper napkin. "Hey," Marlowe said, slamming his palm on the polished steel wall. "Don't you ruin this." The napkin dropped from Jones's hand with the weight of all that sweat. Thwup was the sound it made as it hit the floor, and Jones could do nothing but hold his hand up as if fending off an attack, as Marlowe's mustached upper lip went damp. No attack came, just a heavy silence that only an empty subway car could make at 11:39 p.m. on the Saturday night before inspection. Marlowe's squeezed fist sounded like an eggshell cracking, and the eczema wounds around his knuckles wept. "Now look at what you did. Gonna have to wear gloves to salvage this mess you've made. And you know they slow me down." The door at Jones's back was no longer refreshing. "Get off the fucking door," Marlowe said. "You even put up the goddamn sign." Jones couldn't move. Marlowe's hulking frame blocked the space between the two benches. He used it to his advantage and staked a gloved finger to the center of Jones's chest, right on the zipper of his coveralls and pressed hard enough for it to catch on Jones's chest hair on the other side of his cotton shirt, a 6-ounce heavyweight he'd purchased just for this job. Feel that? Marlowe asked. That's a fraction of what it'll be like if inspection goes bad. You don't know what they do to guys like us. We're expendable. The dregs. Marlowe's face scrunched at that last word, and his staked finger retracted. But we're better than that. I know we're better. I chose you just for this job because I know you're better. Sorry, Jones said. Marlowe nodded and put a hand on Jones's shoulder. I know you are. I am too. But we have, he checked his watch, exactly 15 minutes now to get this job done. Get things to perfection. Perfection? Better than perfection, Marlowe said with glassy eyes, ready to be broken by the slightest touch. Been working on that one for a while. I'm what you call a creative type. Better than this work, but I'm good at it. And, he tapped his temple, I can do the creative work in here, while I do the physical work out here. His smile trembled, and one of his longer mustache hairs quivered like a tuning fork. Hear that? Jones did, like a hornet in his ear. Tunnel C, Marlowe said, looking over his shoulder down the subway car. The most difficult stretch before inspection. Jones looked too. LEDs along the ceiling bowed to the turbulence, and the triangular straps hanging just below them swung like Newton's cradle. The floor shook and kept shaking. The whole car. Jones grabbed a pole to steady himself. This is where you proved to me I was right, Marlowe said. That you have what it takes. That all the back-breaking work down at the loading dock was the cakewalk that did nothing but prepare you for this moment. I chose you, Jones. I chose you. No way we can finish off this car while it shakes like this, Jones said. I can barely stand up. A drop of sweat dangled off Marlowe's long mustache hair. You'll do it. You won't let me down. Teeth chattering, spine rattling, all Jones could do was nod. Marlowe nodded back, his deep smile squeezing his face into a stack of pancakes, and went to work. Jones found his footing with a wide stance, fingertips the only thing touching the subway pole, and he watched Marlowe's virtuosic performance. The man used the chaos of the car's motion to his advantage, going against it when he needed to tighten a bench screw or straighten a poster or affix a warning sticker, then going with it when he needed to close the seam from a bad bolt job on a bench or reseat a subway pole. Marlowe's grace was infectious, a viral spray that infused everything. Jones couldn't escape it. He mirrored Marlowe the best he could, garnering the highest form of approval from the man, which was autonomy. Jones tripped up a few times as the car hit new rhythms, until he envisioned them like tracks on an album, anticipating the change before the final fade out or drum hit. He saw the breadcrumbs Marlowe left for him. Little things just off enough to alert the discerning eyes of inspection. At least what he'd been told. Jones had never been an artistic man, but he imagined these to be his final brushstrokes, the coda to his symphony. Then the subway car fell into a stasis, almost as if it had no weight at all, and the two men stared at each other from opposite sides of the car. Marlowe, where Jones had begun, where he went to clean what must have been the smudge from Jones's head when he'd rested against the door, where the large man's foot found the discarded napkin. Marlon left the ground in a backward somersault to meet the ground again with the sound of a coffin lid closing. Jones rushed to him. Marlowe pointed. The bench. False wall. We can. Marlowe was out. Jones was alone. He did what Marlowe asked after getting the napkin. They both lay as lovers behind the grated wall beneath the bench where the subway eased to a stop, and a door opened. In walked a man wearing a suit with a newspaper under his arm. He paid no attention to the state of things. The glass, the metal, the plastic. He merely sat on a bench and shook the newspaper open. He scanned the words there. He licked a finger. He turned a page. He left. Jones let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. So did Marlowe, through broken teeth and blood, and he said, Perfection. Welcome to the End Your Viewer. I am so glad you made it. This is where I talk about my final thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like, maybe what I learned now. So this story, what it turned out to be is probably one of the more gonzo stories I've written here. It's funny. I think so anyway. It's weird. It's about these two working class, these blue collar guys who are tasked with getting this subway ready, cleaning it, making sure everything's in order in terms of the benches and the poles and et cetera, for something called inspection, which appears to be a very important part of this process. It almost makes it feel like they live in a dystopia or something, because the way Marlowe talks about what happens, if you fail inspection, it gives it that vibe anyway. So I'm not sure if it's 100% sci-fi. I'd say that's the only science fiction element in it, but because I love sci-fi so much and I love dystopian fiction so much, it's in there. It's in there, and there's one other thing that I didn't realize, might not have come through in the audio, because a B and a P can sound very similar. So I will talk about that when we get to it. But in terms of craft and prose and stuff, I don't think there's anything really special here. There's nothing I was really trying to toy with. There's no like different types of narration or different styles of narration. It's your classic third person past tense. We have two characters, well, three technically if you count the last one. But let us quickly go through this just to walk you through my thought process. So I created a man named Jones, and he's our POV character. He is the initiate to help clean the subway. He was initiated by Marlowe to join in this job. And so we have him leaning against the subway doors, and he's mopping the sweat from his upper lip, and he drops the paper napkin. The paper napkin is crucial. Now, when I set out to write this story, I didn't think it was, but I think that's another great thing about just sort of your subconscious at work when you're writing a story. Not to say that this is overly clever or anything, but as you know, this napkin becomes the impetus for the end of Marlowe, or the near end of Marlowe, when they get everything done just in time, and he's going to clean up a mess that Jones left. Not only the greasy head stain or head mark on the glass of the door, but the napkin he dropped as well. And so he slips on it. He gets messed up, and I don't know. He tells him about this false wall. Again, it's kind of sci-fi maybe, and so I don't know. But they have to hide, right? They didn't have enough time to get out of the subway car, so they're hiding right before inspection. And inspection is very simple. So in the artwork, we have this man. He comes out. He's the inspector. He doesn't really look around. He just kind of takes a seat, flips through his newspaper. It's kind of in that weird, again, that sci-fi way where it's taking a concept where someone might feel like, oh, you'd normally expect someone to meticulously go over this thing, but he just sort of soaks it in, right? And then so that's what we have here. And then perfection, it was the thing I was talking about. Perfection, not perfection. Oh man, it's so fucking stupid. The story is so stupid, but it made me laugh. And someone out there, you know who you are, told me that she would love to see a story about just two normal dudes doing something. And so that's what I did here. That was another inspiration to the story. And so yeah, I have him drop the napkin with a thwup sound, which sort of it kind of mirrors when I think it's when he hits the ground, right? Isn't that what happens? I should know this. I wrote the damn story. Oh no. I should have done that in hindsight, but I said it when he falls and it sounds like a coffin lid closing. I should have mirrored that with this. I think that would be an edit I would make. It might be a more powerful link to the beginning, because I like to link things, right? It feels like foreshadowing. It feels like everything was planned out, even though it wasn't. And so this napkin turned out to be, like I said, the impetus of things. And that's what I did when I was getting toward the end. I was like, okay, what's going to happen? And it just turned out that Marlowe got injured. Jones had to more or less save the day by hiding him behind this false wall. Well, both of them, in fact. But anyway, this is where I established that it's 11:39 on the Saturday night before inspection. So we are learning through exposition and dialogue, but I think it's okay because we're explaining this to a new recruit, so to speak. He's talking, he's talking about like, you don't know what they do to guys who fail inspection. We're expendable, the dregs, and so on and so forth. But not only that, Marlowe chose him. He chose him. He's kind of like the chosen one. He's the chosen hero. And we find out that Jones had worked on, some dock or something, some loading dock, and it's been kind of his his Karate Kid mentorship, his training ground for for getting a subway car ready, apparently, and that's what it is. And I have some different imagery. This I particularly like this part where when he's talking to him and he's talking about how he's, oh yeah, here we go. I should talk about perfection first. Get things to perfection. And you can see Grammarly's trying to correct me. And then Jones says perfection, better than perfection. Fucking stupid as hell. But it made me laugh. And I didn't plan on this whatsoever. I was trying to think of a more clever word. Something that might actually be clever. But then I was envisioning Marlowe in my head, and he's not a super clever guy. He thinks he is, and that's definitely shown here when he's talking about, hey, I'm a creative guy. You know, I'm good at this job, but I'm good at doing this when I do this job, right? I can do double duty. And so therein lies the irony, right? He's not really a clever guy. But when I use the mustache. So in the beginning, I had Jones with a shaved mustache, and it was a newly shaven mustache. And so I was thinking somehow I'm going to work that into the story. Maybe that's something I add in when I go back and edit this. But then I wanted to give Marlowe a mustache. And so I use the physical objects. I feel like it's important to use physical traits, physical objects for reasons. And so I use his smile trembled and one of his longer mustache hairs quivered like a tuning fork. He's like, hear that? And Jones did, like a hornet in his ear. And this sort of is when things turn. And this is honestly when I was writing, I was about 500 words in. I always try to turn the scene right about then. I think it's important. Gives you enough time, particularly when you're writing a 1,000-word short story. So it could be the midway point of your scene. It could be a little bit toward the end, toward the beginning. It doesn't really matter a whole lot. But I think if you get too far into your scene, too close to the end, and you haven't turned the scene, meaning changing the charge, right? The way the scene begins and the way it ends. So if a character comes in with a positive emotional state, they should have an inverse of that, or like a level up or a level down. So more positive or negative, something. I'm really generalizing here. It can be much more nuanced than that. But that is essentially what a scene turn is, right? It's when things start heading toward, it's kind of like a midpoint, really, in a longer form short story. And so when you have this, that allows things to change up. You're right. And it allows me to know that if I start doing that at the midpoint, I know I'm going to buy myself hopefully enough time to create a satisfying conclusion, because we know a lot of times I don't outline this stuff, but in my head, I've written so many stories that it just starts to kind of come together for the most part. I don't get me wrong, I fail quite often, as you've seen in these videos. But anyway, all this shit goes down. Jones, he starts to witness Marlowe as a virtuoso, right? He's just kicking ass. He's cleaning stuff up. He's moving things into place. But like an amazing mentor, like a true mentor, what he does is he starts leaving things just slightly off for Jones to clean up, right? To show him like, hey man, I chose you. I know you're good at this. And Jones notices he is given autonomy. So that is the best form of praise for him, because he's not told what to do. You know, he knows that Marlowe's kind of looking at him through the eyes in the back of his head. And because he doesn't hear anything, he knows he's doing a great job. And everything seems to be uplifting and going well. But then what happens? Well, this is when everything kind of flips right before the conclusion. And that is when they end up on opposite ends of the car, and they're looking at each other like, we did it. And then all of a sudden, Marlowe goes to clean the sweat smudge on the glass of the door that Jones was leaning against, as well as the napkin they forgot to pick up because of the conversation. They got a little bit caught up, because originally Marlowe was going to clean up the napkin, but he didn't until now. And what does that do? He misses it. He steps on it. He eats shit right on the subway floor. Jones pulls him, and this is, like I said, man, this is random as all hell. But the bench, false wall, they can get out. They can go and hide. Inspection comes in, and literally, this is it. There's one paragraph of this man we see in the artwork, the man reading the newspaper. And I really wanted to keep it simple. Sometimes I think when you do things, you don't spend a lot of time on stuff. You don't slow things down necessarily and add more detail. It adds a lot more of a profound impact. I've noticed that when reading novels sometimes, where something very bad or detrimental or like significant, let's say, will happen on the page, like in a word, in a sentence. I try to pay attention to stuff like that and think about it and use it when it makes sense in my own stuff. So that's what I tried to do here, because this guy shows up, He's an old man, newspaper under his arm, and he just goes in and sits down, and then he leaves, and that's it. But what happens is the way we know that everything went okay is right here at the very end when Marlowe lets out his breath through his broken teeth and blood, and he says, "Perfection." So that ends the story. It was a goofy one. It was fun for me to write. I think, again, this is also about perspective, right? And relativism, because it's always difficult to choose the POV of the story, right? We could have chosen the man. I could have chosen the old man and wondering, what is this guy doing alone? Been a very different story. It would have been completely different. But what I chose to do is tell it from the POV of a man who was off screen, right? Out of frame, the one observing this man sort of just sweating in this immaculate subway. I think that's one thing to note too, is that gave me the idea as well, is that because the subway is so pristine and clean and kind of antiseptic and manufactured in such a way that it almost feels artificial, it gave me the idea of the cleaning crew. So yeah, here we are. We have two goofball blue-collar guys who are taking their work very, very seriously. And like I said, you are always the hero of your own story, or your protagonist is always the hero of their own story, no matter how insignificant. And here we have two blue-collar guys who value their jobs very much, and their work, and what their product is, essentially. And I know I alluded to the fact that inspection could be a very, very bad thing. We don't know what happens to guys who fail inspection, but nonetheless, I think it's cool to sometimes take a step back, try a different POV. Sometimes I read, I should do a review on it. I've been talking about it for a while now, but Adam Skelter's Story by Numbers, fantastic book, highly recommend it. And he has a thing in there for a brainstorming process. And it's actually part of his, the way he constructs a plot is, who is the best POV character? And one of his examples is the worst person for the job. I kind of had subconsciously did that. So the novel I'm working on now, it is kind of that way, right? In a way, it's somewhat the worst person for the job. And so it's not always the guy or the girl or whoever it is, the creature who is the best person, who's the badass, who has all the skills, right? Because I think even when it's that person, you need to strip those skills away and bring them back to baseline to work their way up, right? Because all of the tools they had, they cannot use for this task. Because if everyone was a badass, it wouldn't be an interesting story. And so I challenge you out there, next time you're writing a short story or even a novel, think about your POV character a lot and think about, like, would this story be more interesting if I told it through someone else's POV? Because you might be surprised. Again, I think that's what's the beauty of storytelling as well, is that every story has a seemingly infinite amount of POVs, which yields a very different tale depending on which POV you choose. And so I love thinking about that stuff. I love playing with it. So I challenge you, do that in your own work. And thanks. I know I've been blabbering a while. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for watching. And keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you actually not just next week, but this week later with a live stream. Keep an eye out. I'm going to put something up on YouTube. Hope you can make it. All right, I am done. Goodbye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.